Well, happy Labor Day, Downsview Baptist Church. It is early in the morning here on Monday. Actually, it's not all that early, but it seems early at camp when it's so dreary like this. The area is, as you can see, pretty rainy and blowy. The trees are blown around in the wind. It was a rainy night last night, but Pam and I are glad to stay out here. We have a fine little trailer that we have, and there's a new song by, it's on an album called Chris Tomlin and Friends, and I don't actually know, I should figure it out, I suppose, who he's singing with, but there's a song that is, has a line in it, or the chorus in it is that I pray heavens like rain on a tin roof. And where he's saying is there's a comfort about being out in a tent or a trailer in some kind of shelter when it's pouring rain around outside of you, and you know you're protected, you know you're cared for. There's something cozy about being there, and frankly, we just love being out in the woods like this. It's just on the edge of Waterloo, as you know, and pretty easy to get here. But because it's Labor Day in particular, I thought, well, there's a few thoughts that we can give with respect to that whole concept of labor. Morning, guys. Sorry? Oh, no, a little video for our church folks. Yeah. Pretty amateur at it still. Some of the folks walking on by, and after a while they start to know you're the preacher in the camp, and have a few words with us, and glad that they know they can do that. Sometimes I edit those things out, but I just think, yeah, it's cool that people are around and knowing what we're up to. On Labor Day, the one of the verses at least that come to mind is, of course, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58. The Apostle Paul has just been eager to help this church with these wonderful words that, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work or the labor of the Lord, knowing that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Of course, he's writing to a church that's very immature in their Christianity. They're very new at it. This is something that they're still learning, and they're trying to figure out how this all works together. And frankly, their Christian life doesn't look a whole lot like your Christian life just yet. And all of us find that in different areas, don't we? That we think on one hand, well, I should have learned, or I feel like I would have had a better idea of how this all works by this point, but I don't. And I'm still struggling away at it. And yet the reason that the Corinthian church was having difficulty is not because they have been working at it for a long time, but they're relatively new. It's a young church. And because it's a young church, they're not going to look a whole lot like a church yet. You may recall a time in your Christian life that you understood exactly that kind of a message, that you think, I've surrendered my life to Christ, and I legitimately have. I've trusted in his saving work on my behalf. I've surrendered my life to his lordship. I am eager to live in a way that shows that I love him and seeking to grow in my love for him. And you're kind of on that road to Damascus-esque time, like the Apostle Paul was, when he's like, okay, Lord, what would you have me to do? And you're like, okay, I'm in. I wonder what being in actually looks like. And sometimes what it looks like is not being sure, and not being sure what is next, and what's happening in terms of what my Christian life is going to develop into and look like. And the interesting thing about chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians is that it's all about first things, or front burner principles. I'm just made the coffee on our little Coleman stove there. We have two burners, and I think of front burner, meaning those are the things that you're actually dealing with right now. You don't have something on simmer on the back burner. You've got something on the front burner. It's concerning you. You're dealing with it. And the front burner issues is what 1 Corinthians 15 speaks about. That I want to speak to you, he says in verse 1, about matters that are of first importance. That Christ died according to the scriptures, and he lays out the gospel of the death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ, and how central that is, and how front burner an issue it is, particularly for these young Christians at the city of Corinth. He lays all of that out, and does so by acknowledging that there are many folks who are going to deny it, who have been denying it, who have been telling them that the resurrection's not real, or resurrections aren't real, or resurrections couldn't be real because that's just not how things work. And then Paul lays out ideas as to saying, well, let's just walk through that for a minute. Because folks who say it can't happen are one thing, but folks who want to believe the gospel or believe Christianity without a resurrection, it's just foolish. We're still in our sins. People who have died, we're not going to see them again. We're false witnesses of Christ because we're saying the resurrection happened when it didn't happen. I mean, there's all kinds of implications of that not being true. But indeed, he presses on with them, not just to get into a theological argument or theological fine points, as sometimes people accuse those kind of things of being, but he moves right through it to say, listen, one day here's what's going to happen. And he lays out the beauty of the return of Christ and all its majesty and what that's going to look like, and how those who are patient and hanging in there. And in some ways, that's what you and I need these days, don't we? We need a encouragement to just hang in there when we are, well, when it's raining, when you're trying to think that things would be better than they are, and you're just, in some ways, you feel like you're hanging in there. And frankly, on the basis of all of the promises of the gospel, the certainty of the coming of Christ, the reality of his resurrected state now, the fact that he is at the right hand of the Father interceding for his people who are trusting him like that, he says, listen, just be steadfast, immovable, like hang in there. And hang in there can seem trite sometimes, but that's what he says. Steadfast. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. It's that passage from Jeremiah in Lamentations chapter 3. That Christ's love and faithfulness has been steadfast towards us and for us. Be steadfast, immovable. Don't be moved around by every new idea, every wind of doctrine, is what he just said back in the previous chapters, about not being swayed by every new idea that comes along. And you and I have to be careful of that these days, don't we? It's that, listen, what the thing that's going to endure, no matter who's in the White House or who's leading the party in the House of Commons here in Canada, friends, the Lord Jesus Christ is the one who is steady and immovable and trustworthy, and we can be assured that he's going to be there. And so the Apostle Paul says to this church, listen, what you need to do is be steadfast and immovable. But here, not just standing still, but being steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, that you would find yourself given to the task of seeing that your life looks like the Christian you've been declared to be, and that you're helping others to do exactly that. I think in many ways Mark Dever from 9 Marks Ministries is right when he says, if you consider yourself a disciple of Christ and you're not helping other people become mature disciples of Christ, I just don't know what you mean. He says, I don't know what you mean by a disciple of Christ who's not helping other people become that as well. And he says, listen, you just see that your life is abounding with the work of the Lord. Not finding yourself saying, I've done enough, it's time for someone else to step up. Well, I've done everything. You know, some of the young people, some of the older people, some of the newer people, some of the veteran people. You know, we're not to look for other people to be our excuses for not being obedient to that text, that your life should be one that is abundantly full of the labor of the Lord. I think of that on Labor Day. I think we're celebrating and marking folks who, the labor movement is traditionally not the white collar, but the blue collar folks, those who are who've been laboring and working hard in this world to do the nuts and bolts, literally sometimes, but the nuts and bolts work of keeping a society together. And when we think of that, you think of that in terms of Christianity. Most people should not do what I do. Most people should not many of you ought to be teachers. The scriptures tell us clearly. And that means that most folks should be seeking to hear what the few teachers there are saying and then putting it into practice. And of course, the teachers themselves, we are always sheep before we are shepherds. And so as you're thinking about, your labor in the Lord, see to it that the labor, that the effort frankly, that the work that you do is a work that is helping other people to see the glory of King Jesus. Well, friends, we're looking forward to this week that's leading up to our outdoor service next Sunday on the 13th of September. Remember, just one service at 11 o'clock. Make your registrations as usual. We're making preparations for you to be socially distant, but the opportunity for us to be able to sing to the glory of God outside. I hope many of you will make plans to be there, and that we can indeed enjoy that labor of the Lord. That is not in vain. Notice how he says it's not a waste of time. Your labor, the work that you're doing, the life that you're living before Christ is never a waste of time. Be encouraged in God's promises for you this day, friends. Cheers.